I was stunned when I found a message on my husband's phone that exposed his affair. I never thought I'd be in this position. I always saw posts like this and thought, I would know if my husband was cheating. I would see the signs. I thought we were happy, not perfect, but solid. We'd been married for 7 years, together for almost 10. We had our little routines. Friday night movie marathons, lazy Sunday mornings, inside jokes that no one else would get. I thought that meant something. Looking back, the signs were there. James had been acting off for about a month, but I kept convincing myself it was nothing. He was more attached to his phone, but who isn't these days? He had started going to the gym more, saying he wanted to get in better shape. He even bought new cologne, which was weird for him, but I told myself maybe he just wanted to feel good about himself. I brushed it off every time that little nagging voice in my head whispered that something felt different. I didn't want to be that wife, the one who snoops, who makes a problem where there isn't one. And then, completely by accident, I found out the truth. James left his phone on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower. It vibrated with a text, and I wouldn't have thought twice about it if not for the name on the screen. Just a single letter. K. My stomach clenched, but I still told myself I was being ridiculous. Maybe it was a coworker. Maybe it was one of his guy friends being dumb. But I looked anyway, and that was the moment my entire life shifted. Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. When can I see you again? I felt like I had been punched in the gut. My hands started shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. My brain went completely blank, like it refused to process what I was looking at. But I kept scrolling because how could I not? And the more I read, the worse it got. Months of messages, flirty, teasing, affectionate, inside jokes, plans to meet up. Some were recent, some were from weeks ago. Some made it painfully clear that this wasn't just a fling. It wasn't just sex. James was emotionally invested in her, and the worst part, he never even mentioned her name in their messages. He was careful, but she wasn't. That's when I saw it. A photo. Nothing explicit, but it didn't need to be. A mirror selfie in a dimly lit hotel bathroom. Blonde, younger than me, wearing nothing but an oversized men's dress shirt. James's shirt! My throat closed up, my face burned with humiliation. This was real. This was happening. My husband was sleeping with someone else. For a split second, I almost marched into the bathroom and ripped open the shower curtain to confront him right then and there. But something stopped me. The anger I expected didn't come. Instead, something cold settled in my chest. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to cry. Not yet. If James had been lying to me for months, then I needed to know everything before I made my move. I took screenshots of everything, every text, every photo. Then I sent them to my own phone and deleted the evidence from his. I put his phone back exactly where he left it and went back to making dinner, even though my hands were still trembling. James came out of the shower like nothing was wrong. He kissed me on the cheek, asked what we were having for dinner, made a joke about how good it smelled. I smiled at him, told him I was making lasagna, his favorite. I didn't eat a single bite. That night, I lay in bed next to him, staring at the ceiling while he slept soundly beside me. My mind raced through every moment over the past few months, trying to piece together the puzzle I had been too blind to see before. The late nights at work, the sudden fitness obsession, the emotional distance, all of it was leading to this. And I had been so trusting, so stupid, that I let it happen right under my nose. I didn't sleep that night. I barely moved. I just kept thinking, who the hell is Kay? And more importantly, how am I going to destroy them both? The morning after I found the messages, I got up and acted like nothing was wrong. James told me he had a late meeting that night, so I shouldn't wait up. I told him that was fine, smiled when he kissed me goodbye, and even wished him a good day. As soon as he was gone, I got to work. I had already seen enough on his phone, but I wanted more. His laptop was easy to get into. He never logged out of anything, and he was too lazy to clear his search history. It only took a few minutes to find hotel confirmations, dinner receipts, and messages with Kristen. I wasn't even surprised anymore. 6 months of secret meetups, weekend getaways, and excuses about working late. There was no denying it. He wasn't just having an affair, he was fully living a double life. By the time I was done, I had everything I needed. Screenshots of texts, emails, payment receipts, even a forwarded confirmation for a trip he told me was for work. Kristen had booked a couples massage for them that weekend. I forwarded it all to myself and then sat there, staring at the screen, letting it sink in. I could have confronted him the second he walked through the door. I could have thrown the evidence in his face and watched him scramble for excuses. But I wanted something better. I wanted him to feel cornered, exposed. That night I cooked dinner like usual. He sat at the table, texting between bites, probably telling Kristen he couldn't see her that weekend because of our stupid dinner plans. I watched him, waiting to see if there was even a flicker of guilt. Nothing. The next day, I set my plan in motion. James' parents had been trying to get us to come over for weeks. He always had an excuse, but that morning I told his mom we'd be there. I made sure she invited a few of his closest friends too, everyone who still believed he was a good husband. He didn't question it when I told him. He barely looked up from his phone. I spent the afternoon preparing. I printed everything, the texts, the receipts, even the forwarded confirmation from Kristen. I wasn't just going to tell him I knew, I was going to make sure he had no way out. Dinner started off normal. His parents were happy to have us there, his friends were joking around, and James was drinking like he didn't have a single problem in the world. I waited until everyone was settled before I spoke. There's something I want to share with everyone. Conversation stopped. I reached into my bag, pulled out a folder, and put it in front of him. You tell me. He started reading. The room went silent. His friends looked at each other. His mother asked what was going on. He didn't answer. I told them for him. I told them how he had been meeting Kristen at hotels for 6 months, how he had spent thousands on dinners, gifts, and trips, all while pretending to be a loyal husband. I told them how he had lied about work, lied about business trips, lied about everything. No one knew what to say. His mother whispered something under her breath. His best friend swore under his. I pulled out my phone and let them hear it. Kristen's voicemail, the one where she called him baby and told him she couldn't wait to see him again, the one she left while I was making him dinner. James finally spoke, saying it wasn't what it looked like, that he could explain. I told him not to bother. I had already packed his things. His bags were in his car, the locks were changed, and I had already spoken to a lawyer. His mom started crying. His dad shook his head. His best friend called him a piece of shit. I told them I was sorry for ruining dinner, but I thought they should know who James really was. Then I left. I didn't stay to watch the fallout. I walked out of his parents' house, got in my car, and drove home. My hands were steady on the wheel, my breathing even. I thought I would feel relief, maybe even triumph, but all I felt was drained. The weight of what I had just done sat heavy in my chest. Not regret, not sadness, just exhaustion. I had spent weeks pretending, planning, making sure I had everything lined up perfectly. Now that it was done, I wasn't sure what to do with myself. My phone started buzzing before I even made it out of their neighborhood. James, his mother, his best friend. I ignored them all. When I pulled into the driveway, I just sat there for a moment, staring at the house. It already felt different. I had spent years making it a home, and now it was just mine. No more waiting for James to come home from late meetings. No more pretending not to notice when he turned his phone screen away from me. No more shared spaces that were tainted with his lies. Just silence. I finally went inside and headed straight to the bedroom. His things were already gone. I had packed them earlier that day, stuffing everything he owned into garbage bags and throwing them in the trunk of his car. I wanted him to see for himself that there was nothing left for him here. I sat on the bed, staring at the empty space where he had slept beside me every night for years. It was unsettling how normal it looked, like nothing had changed. But everything had. James kept calling. I finally turned my phone off. I wasn't ready to deal with him. Wasn't ready to hear whatever excuse or half-assed apology he had prepared. He didn't deserve to explain himself. He had spent 6 months making me feel like a fool, smiling at me while he was sneaking around with Kristen. He had already said everything he needed to say in those messages. The next morning, I woke up to an email from him. No denial, no lies, just, "I'm sorry," repeated in a dozen different ways. He wrote about how he had messed up, how he loved me, how he didn't want to lose me. He begged me to talk to him, to at least let him explain. I read it once, let the words sit there on the screen, then deleted it without replying. A few hours later, his mother called. I let it go to voicemail, already knowing exactly what she was going to say. When I finally listened, it was even worse than I expected. She sobbed about how marriage is about forgiveness, how James made a mistake, but he's still a good man. She begged me to reconsider, to at least talk to him before throwing everything away. I blocked her number. James must have realized I wasn't going to respond because, that afternoon, he showed up at the house. I was in the kitchen when I heard his car pull into the drive. A minute later, he was knocking on the front door, calling my name. I didn't answer. He knocked again, harder this time. Then he started pacing on the porch, muttering to himself. I stood behind the door, listening, waiting. Eventually he gave up, but before he left, he shouted that I was being cruel, that he deserved a chance to explain. That made me laugh. He had 6 months to come clean. He had every opportunity to tell me the truth, but instead, he had let me sit across from him at dinner, kiss him goodnight, believe we were happy, all while he was sneaking around with Kristen. He didn't deserve anything from me. The texts from his friends started rolling in a few hours later. Some of them were just checking in, probably trying to get the full story. His best friend, though, wasn't subtle. I had no idea, I swear. I would have told you if I did. I'm disgusted. He's a fucking idiot. I didn't respond. I didn't care if his friends knew or not. They weren't my problem. Then came the messages from his coworkers. I hadn't expected the email I sent to spread as much as it did, but apparently it had made its way through his entire office. Someone messaged me saying that a lot of people at work were talking about it. I found that oddly satisfying. James had spent months lying, making himself comfortable in his double life. Now everyone knew who he really was. Kristen even reached out. Just a single message. I didn't know he was married. I'm sorry. I stared at it for a long time before deleting it. Maybe she really hadn't known. Maybe she was just another person he had lied to. But I didn't care. She wasn't the one who had betrayed me. James was. Over the next few days, I heard bits and pieces about what was happening to him. He had moved into some extended stay motel on the other side of town. His friends weren't answering his calls. His parents were embarrassed. His boss had pulled him aside for a talk. And though he didn't lose his job, people at the office weren't looking at him the same way. I should have felt bad. I didn't. The last time he tried to contact me, it was another long, rambling email. He wrote about how much he missed me, how he wished things had gone differently. He said he hoped one day we could at least be friends. I didn't even open it. I just forwarded it to my lawyer and blocked his email too. Once the divorce papers were finalized, I expected to feel something. Anger, sadness, relief, but mostly I just felt done. It wasn't dramatic. There was no big emotional breakdown, no sudden moment of closure. Just paperwork, signatures, and a quiet acceptance that my life was now mine again. I took off my wedding ring the same day I got the final notice. It had felt strange keeping it on, even though I had told myself I was just waiting until everything was official. The moment I took it off, I realized how much lighter I felt. Like I had been carrying something heavy for months without realizing it. A week later, I went out for dinner with a few close friends. It was the first time in a long time that I actually enjoyed myself, that I wasn't constantly waiting for the next lie to fall into my lap. Someone asked me if I had heard from James, and for the first time, I didn't feel a stab of anger when I thought about him. No, I said, sipping my drink, and I hope I never do. And I meant it. The first few weeks after the divorce were strange, not painful, not even necessarily difficult, just different. My life had been so entangled with James for years that I had to remind myself I didn't have to check in with anyone, didn't have to cook extra portions for dinner, didn't have to wonder if the person next to me was lying straight to my face. I was alone, but for the first time in a long time, that wasn't a bad thing. James must have realized he had no way back in because he finally stopped trying to contact me. I heard bits and pieces through other people. His parents were still embarrassed, his job was tense, and he had been bouncing between different places, too proud to move back in with his family, but too broke to afford anything nice. Kristen was out of the picture. Whether she left on her own, or because she finally saw him for the liar he was, I didn't know, and I didn't care. I spent the next few months rebuilding my life. I started going out more, reconnecting with friends I had unintentionally drifted from when I was married. I started doing things just for myself. Small things like buying fresh flowers for the house. Bigger things like taking a weekend trip alone just because I could. I wasn't trying to reinvent myself, but I was finally living on my terms again, and that was enough. One night, I was out with friends when someone brought up James. It had been months since the last time I'd even thought about him. Apparently, things had only gotten worse for him. He had lost a few more friends, burned some professional bridges, and from what they heard, he was still jumping from place to place, never quite landing anywhere. For a second I expected to feel something. Pity, maybe, or even satisfaction, but there was nothing. Just a quiet indifference. His life was a mess, but it wasn't my mess anymore. I had already cleaned up the only part that ever mattered, getting rid of him. At some point in the night my friend nudged me and asked if I was finally ready to start dating again. The idea had seemed ridiculous a few months ago, but now, I didn't know. I wasn't in a rush, wasn't looking for anything serious, but I also wasn't clinging to the past. I guess we'll see, I said, taking a sip of my drink, and for the first time in a long time, I actually meant it.